Hey everyone, thanks for checking out my submission for Chasm's Call 3D Render Challenge, a render challenge set out by Pwnisher or Clint. A huge shout out to Clint. He does amazing work, and I'm so thankful that he puts these render challenges together. You should check out his videos. I'll link the top 100 and all renders for this challenge down in the description. For this project, I wanted to start and discuss the process, where I took this idea from concept to completion and all these steps along the way. First, let's start with the rules. Your submission must follow the provided template, which you can see on screen right now. We have to place a character on the provided foreground shelf. We must create a sense of depth, one submission per artist and one artist per submission. You must follow the technical specs like frame rate, resolution, frame count, etc. No generative AI was allowed, and we must submit by Monday, March 10th. Here are some examples that were provided with the template. As you can see, there were many ways to stay within the rules and make some really engaging art. I really like this idea of when you jumped into something like a cave where it was, you could see all the sides of it. And I started thinking about what might shape, what would I want to do with that shape? And so I started thinking, and one of my first ideas was this hollowed out space station kind of idea where you could park a ship inside and then have things happening inside, and maybe it could be destroyed. One of the things that I really wanted though was dynamic lighting. So that's when I started pulling some concept art to see if my first idea might be viable. So starting with the space station, we grabbed a bunch of circular objects. I really liked the idea of it being like a cavern or a tunnel that this person was looking out over. And so I grabbed a bunch of insides and outsides of some spaceships that I liked, maybe with some backgrounds, etc. Looking for little details or textures or things that people have thought of that had a whole lot more time to focus on this kind of spaceship design study. I also went and pulled some character design information. So some things that I was looking for were like helmets and suit materials and shoes, armor, etc. Lighting was a big thing that I wanted to focus on. I knew I wanted that dynamic lighting, so helmet visors and maybe some lights on the actual armor itself. So I started in Blender and I started to block out my scene and see if there was anything dynamic I could do with the lighting and making sure that things might look cool and really create that sense of depth, going back to those rules. So this was my first render after, a few hours in Blender trying some different things. And one of the things I really liked initially was that cut in the space station as it goes down, and then the lighting that casts across the back, and then the depth that you get by seeing that planet moon in the background. So those were elements that I really wanted to keep. And then moving on to my second version of this, I really started playing with those particles that were floating in the air, and then making that lighting even more dynamic, changing some of the structures and then animating the cameras a little bit more to maybe drive some more of that sense of motion that things were destroyed. I also started playing with the alpha channels on the edges of the destruction, trying to see some of those highlights get broken up in that shadow, trying to tell more of a story with that. It was at this point that I kind of ran out of a little bit of time. So I started a little bit late, and then I took a week or so off, and then I came back and I was like, wow, this isn't a decent spot, but we're coming close to the deadline, so I'm gonna have to start making some concessions. And so I started with this, and I added in another character thinking that would be cool to float towards the camera and reveal. And then started playing more with those destroyed things, grabbed some ships from a random ship generator online, and thought that those might be really interesting to put around the ship, maybe in those little tucked away areas. Maybe a couple are floating as if they had been destroyed, just really trying to tell a story of what happened here in this scene. Alright, so another day had passed, and I let this render overnight. I started working on the foreground a lot more, as it's the focus of your eye, and less on the background. The particles didn't render on this one, just probably to help out render time. But started adding details, started adding in some color too, to see if the idea of adding maybe some primary colors would help. And then added a little reflectivity to kind of give some more visual interest. Also started dropping in my character. At this point the project is due here pretty soon, so I knew I was going to be rushing. So dropped in my character to see what maybe he looked like with the lighting. You know, he was in a separate project and instanced into this project. So really just seeing what that might look like all together. After about another day, I started working on the foreground animation a little bit more, started adding more particle systems. So there's now 3, one for that back cylinder, one for the mid-ground cylinder, and then one in the foreground, so anything between camera and character. Trying to just really give that sense of depth, everything from there's glass in the foreground all the way to a planet all the way in the background. I added some more color to the outside and some small details like my logo and what this little thing stands for, and some hanger numbers on the right side. And then I started animating, so this was a first pass at the animation, I'm pretty sure. Then I moved on to play blasts, where I started just rendering them in the viewport render to make sure that I could really get a sense of what was happening. So as these go on, you can tell that I've started really refining the movements. I don't think that they're perfect per se. I think it's really difficult to animate someone in space and trying to get what their movement and that shift of weight is. And at one point we did hit the we have to render this or else the project won't meet the deadline. Yeah, and this is the final play blast that has that animation on it. And so I was just really looking to double check to really try and shift that weight around, use that arm to push off that anchor and then have him float into the air. You know, you might kick off a little bit trying to make your body more rigid. You know, I think there's definitely room for improvement here, but like I said, deadline was looming, so had to make it to render. So this is the final render out of Blender, and it was looking pretty good. I was liking the reflections on the ground, the reveal was good enough, and then all of a sudden I realized we were missing all the particles in the midground, so we had to do another re-render, which took a little bit of ingenuity on render passes and removing volumetrics so that the render would come out on time. Once that final render came out, I started putting all the pieces back together in passes, and so each one of these is a different layer that comes out, and then we start color correcting and color grading for that final image. And then here is the final. Yeah, so overall, I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. I think I met the goal of having some really dynamic lighting. And, space is something I've never done before. And so, definitely would like to improve on the animation overall. One of the big things that sticks out to me personally is the characters. They just don't have the emphasis that I was looking for. These were originally supposed to be animal characters, and so as I started running out of time, those animal features started dropping off less and less, and so I started just basically putting heads on bodies that I had access to, and then putting some armor on that I just found. And so I'd like it to be way more custom. I don't even think you can tell, but the main character is a pug, and then you probably might be able to tell, but it's way less likely that white character is actually a fox. And so being able to tell that story a little bit better, where those things are much more readable. This project's only 5 seconds long, and so making it much more readable so you have time to read both the faces in that time is something that is definitely necessary to make this a top 100 candidate for in the future. But other than that, and as with all projects I think of this scale, more detail would be great, adding more grime and grunge and adding reasons why something might happen, etc. Those are things that really make a scene like this live. One other thing overall is where the two pieces of the space station came apart. I think that those areas could be improved upon. Obviously, I don't think they're the focus, but more detail there of showing the insides of the space station, or maybe there's holes in the space station from what happened to this thing. Telling that story a little bit more definitely would have helped. It feels a little bit vanilla, and adding a little bit more flavor throughout the process would have been amazing. But yeah, leave your feedback in the comments, whether you liked it a lot or you would like to make a bunch of changes to it. Let me know. I'm here to learn just as much as you guys are. So if you're still here, remember to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps the channel grow and lets me know that you want more of this type of content. So thank you a lot. Appreciate you. Peace.